Welcome. In today's tutorial, we're going to be diving into LUTs, looks, and how to use them in the editing app of your choice. So to kick things off, I want to take a moment and touch on what a LUT is. A LUT usually comes in a .cube file, and this .cube file is kind of like a roadmap for your footage. Your footage, if you're shooting on a cinema camera or a camera that can shoot in RAW or log or flat, any sort of picture profile where the image sort of feels washed out, milky and desaturated, that is log or RAW. And a .cube file or a LUT essentially is giving your editing app of choice, Final Cut, Premiere, Resolve, basically ones and zeros on how to interpret that footage. And some LUTs, which we offer, conversion looks or conversion LUTs, basically are converting that from a log to a more 709 inspired look. And I'll touch on 709 here in a moment. And then we also offer here at Tropic several creative looks, which kind of actually transform that footage into something a bit more stylized. Maybe the black point is a little more lifted, or a little more blues or greens in the shadows. We have a variety of creative looks as well. And one last thing too, throughout this tutorial, you might hear me say 709 inspired. And what I mean by that, just to define that term, 709 is in reference to Rec 709. And Rec 709 is essentially kind of like the ubiquitous standard for the way TV screens and computer monitors, that is like the color space of most of your common sort of viewing monitors. So when you hear 709 inspired, it is a LUT that kind of transforms your footage, or at least gets your footage close enough to the way it should feel and look on some of those screens. Cool, so to get started in Premiere Pro, I'm going to be walking you through my process on how I'm going to convert some Canon C70 footage, which has a sort of Canon log or C-log, color space. I'm going to be using a conversion LUT to kind of conform it to a more like 709 inspired, natural look, which I kind of explained in the intro is just sort of like a baseline. And then I'm going to walk you through an additional step to add a cinematic look from our cinematic looks packs to kind of give that a more elevated feel. And like I said, if you're hearing me or watching me say this and you have a different camera, maybe an FX3 or a Red, the steps to install and use these .cube files in Premiere Pro are identical. Just for the sake of this sort of demonstration or video tutorial, I'm going to be walking you through with these. But yeah, you could have movie looks, teal and orange looks, or a different conversion look altogether. The steps are the same. So to get started, I'm going to jump inside of Premiere Pro, and I'm going to walk you through basically how I would do this process. So I've got my C70 footage in my timeline right now. And yeah, as you notice, it's, shot in C-Log 2. So the image profile is very flat. And this is a night interior. We had some sort of artificial moonlight coming through the window, but when it's this flat, it's really hard to kind of discern there's really no contrast, there's no saturation. So that's where a conversion look is very helpful. So the first thing I'm going to do is navigate over to my effects. If you do not see this effects tab, you're going to want to go over to window at the top and just make sure that you have effects selected. So with effects, I'm going to type in the word lumetri. If you scroll all the way down to the bottom, because there's quite a few things that have the keyword lumetri, I'm going to select, make sure it's highlighted. I'm going to drag lumetri onto this clip number 1 or whatever clip you're coloring. And a pro tip too, if you are coloring more than one clip, say you have several clips in your timeline, you can do this same exact process and apply this lumetri to an adjustment layer, and the adjustment layer will color everything underneath it. For this tutorial, I only need to color this one clip, but like I said, if you need to color a whole timeline, a whole project, or quite a few clips at once, you can easily use an adjustment layer. So I've got lumetri applied, and the way you can tell is if I navigate over to effects controls, you will see if I kind of close out everything. Let's just you got motion, opacity, and lumetri. So I'm going to arrow open lumetri, and you're going to see two tabs, basic control and creative. If I open up basic, you're going to see very simple parameters to adjust color. You see temperature, tint, exposure, contrast. And opposed to starting from scratch and trying to, adjust the contrast and, maybe bring up some of the saturation, I feel like it's really hard to kind of really know where to start. And that's why we partnered with some really, really talented colorists who basically engineered a kind of natural 709 inspired conversion look, which is going to bring it from this log to kind of what you were probably seeing on the display of your camera. Because your camera kind of internally has a preview LUT or a look, which kind of allows you to get a good sense of like exposure, because it's really hard to like expose an image when you're looking at or making adjustments when you're looking at like a log or a raw, flat image. So the first thing I'm going to do is in the basic correction where it says none. This is where you're going to input or import our .cube files. When you're starting out, you might think that you just drag the .cube file into Premiere Pro, and we've actually gotten some customer emails saying like, hey, it doesn't work, and that's exactly what it is. It's not really like a preset that you drag in. It's basically, like I said in the intro, it's like a roadmap. It's like a file that's telling the editing app of your choice, like how to interpret or view that footage. So what I'm gonna do under basic correction, I'm gonna go browse. And under browse, I'm gonna navigate over to my desktop. Like I said, wherever you have on your computer, could be a hard drive, I'm gonna navigate to the conversion looks. Like I said, I'm shooting on a C70 for this demo. If you have an FX3, a Red, a Blackmagic, you would just kind of use whatever conversion look from us or from wherever to kind of convert the footage first to a more natural 709 inspired color space. So in here, you're gonna see quite a few options. The standard conversion is probably the most common thing you would do. We also have several ones that are like plus vibrancy and saturation, plus contrast. I would give you those options, but I feel like the standard correction is gonna get me to a spot because I know that I'm gonna add a creative look on top of this to kind of take it a step further. So with that selected, I'm gonna hit open. And instantly you can see, if I toggle off this little switch, before and after, you can now see this is getting much closer to what it was looking like in my C70 when I was, framing up and shooting this shot. Because before with it turned off, with it, it doesn't even look like a night interior. And now it's starting to kind of feel like that nighttime scene I was describing. And that's what that conversion look is doing. The conversion look isn't adding any color in the shadows or any sort of creative things, any sort of things beyond just sort of naturally converting it. So now that we've added the conversion look, the next step I like to do is in Lumetri Color, if you arrow down to creative, I like to add a creative look. A creative look kind of takes that look a step further. And over at Tropic Color, we have, cinematic looks, movie looks, nature looks, teal and orange looks. I mean, we have a handful of looks that kind of take your footage in different directions. And one of my favorites is cinematic looks. So what I'm going to do, very similar to the basic control, right where it says none, I'm going to go over to browse. And I'm going to go over to my desktop, and you'll see I previously in the basic tab went to Canon C70 or C-Log. Those were the conversion looks, but now I'm going to be using one of our cinematic looks. And one of my favorites right off the jump is Artistry. And Artistry, right after I hit open, it's going to come on a bit strong because we designed these kind of for all camera profiles, and some cameras, log or raw, is actually a bit more flat, and others, have a bit more contrast and saturation. So right when I hit open, it's going to actually kind of maybe feel like too much. I'm going to tell you how to kind of walk that off. So I'm going to hit open, and you can instantly see that look, that creative look has been applied. And yeah, I think anybody with any sort of sensibility with color would say, yeah, that's pretty extreme. You're seeing some clipping, you're seeing some sort of shadows getting clamped down. And that is because when you go over to intensity, it's at 100%. And what I really like about these creative looks, they're all kind of to taste. It's on your preference. Maybe your project does call for punchy blacks and punchy highlights. Well, maybe on that higher percentage, this could work for you. One thing I like to do without even looking at this percentage, I like to select it and take it all the way to 0. And what I like to do is I like to kind of zero in on my footage and don't even look at that percentage, and with your mouse to start dragging up. And I'm going to go up right to where I feel like it looks nice. I'm kind of liking right around there. And that's about 53%. So now there's a 53% of the TC, Tropic Color Artistry look or creative look from our cinematic looks being applied. And if I just hit this active switch, it's gonna only turn off the creative tab. So this was just the conversion look. So here, actually, I'll walk you through the whole process. This is log, this is C-Log2. This is with the sort of conversion look, the just standard conversion, which kind of makes your log or C-Log footage have a 709 inspired conversion. And now this is with the creative look applied. So we've gone from log, C-Log2 to a fully graded image. But I really do encourage you to kind of take this a bit further. Maybe you want to crush the shadows, raise the highlights, cool it off, add some tint, whatever that might be. What I want to recommend is actually adding a separate instance of Lumetri. So what I'm going to do is actually right click what we've just been tweaking with this instance of Lumetri, and I'm going to title this LUTs or looks. Perfect. So now I'm not going to get confused. If I navigate back over to effects where we found Lumetri first, I'm going to drag another instance of Lumetri onto my footage. You'll see nothing happens. We haven't tweaked anything. And now with this Lumetri, which is below, I'm going to rename this one tint. Maybe I just want to, start diving into some of the tint. Now, if I'm in here, you're going to see none, right under the input LUT. All those LUTs that we imported, conversion and creative LUTs and looks, are in that previous instance of Lumetri. So now what's cool is as I start to stack these different instances of Lumetri, it's very easy for me to toggle these off and on to like see if, to kind of build upon the look and sort of see if I like what I'm getting. So for instance, maybe I want to warm this up just a little bit, and maybe I want to take out some of that green, right? So there, very small tweak. And what I like to do in color is always kind of toggle off and on and see if I really like the correction I did. So if I toggle off, on, I'm seeing, because it's titled and renamed tint, that this instance of Lumetri is just that warm tint and that sort of add of magenta. And this is something you can do for shadows, skin tones. You can make multiple instances or passes of Lumetri, but I always recommend starting with the LUT or the look, the .cube file, which is a combination of the conversion, getting your footage to a 709 inspired look, and then kind of tweaking it a bit there and adding a creative look of your choice. Like I said at Tropic, we have tons of creative looks that can really kind of take your footage in different directions. So that pretty much concludes the Premiere Pro tutorial. Very simple. Like I said, you're just using Lumetri to import or input the conversion LUTs and creative LUTs of your choice to kind of get your footage to a workable place for you to build upon the look further. If you have any questions that were not covered in this tutorial, maybe you're seeing something that I didn't cover, feel free to reach out to our support team at tropicolor@gmail.com. Our team is there to answer any of your questions. The rest of this tutorial is going to be diving into Final Cut Pro, Davinci Resolve, which have a very similar process, but the way you sort of navigate and import the LUTs is a little bit different. So we're going to be diving into that next. All right, let's get started. So for Final Cut users, the processes are very simple. Basically, kind of find out what footage you shot on. Obviously, if you shot on Red, Blackmagic, whatever that might be. And the first step I'm going to walk you through is adding a conversion look. Over at Tropic, we offer several conversion looks. A lot of these cameras come with certain conversion looks. I'll be honest, me personally, I'm not the biggest fan of like the Canon C70, like Canon factory conversion look that conforms the C-Log footage, C-Log2, to a 709 inspired look. So we built our own, but you're more than welcome to use any sort of flavor of a conversion look. So the first part of this tutorial will be walking you through how to import a conversion look into Final Cut Pro, which are the .cube files. And then I'm going to be the second part of this tutorial is going to be diving into how to add a creative look, which we offer over at Tropic. Like I said, you might be using a different camera profile than what I'm using. For this demo, like I said, I'm using the C-Log conversion looks that we offer, but maybe you're on an FX3, a Blackmagic, Red. The steps that I'm going to cover in this tutorial are the exact same. You're essentially just importing a .cube file into Final Cut, and that's what I'm about to walk you through right now. So right off the jump, I have some footage laid on my timeline that I shot on my Canon C70 in C-Log2. And a lot of cameras, though they are recording in a log format, you're previewing them on your monitor with some sort of look or LUT applied. So that kind of onset gives you some indicator of like your exposure, because it's really hard to judge color, exposure, any sort of values when you're looking at a log image. So when you're in post, you kind of want to get back to that look you were seeing in camera, and that's what a conversion look does. So if I navigate over to this kind of top right hand corner of Final Cut, and if you're not seeing that, basically just hit this little kind of like multiple 3 dials, if you will. And what I want to do is navigate over to this I or info button. And over at the very bottom, you can see settings. I'm going to go over to settings actually is checked. Yours might actually say basic, which is totally fine. Just scroll down until you see settings. Your footage, when you drag it in into Final Cut, Final Cut actually may want to find a conversion look that it already has in its library. And chances are when you bring in your footage, it's going to already preload a conversion look for you. If you're happy with that conversion look, feel free to skip to the part of this sort of video tutorial where I'm going to show you how to apply a custom LUT, which would, in this instance be one of our creative looks, to kind of build upon that. But if you are not too stoked or keen off of the sort of auto applied conversion look that Final Cut, uses its judgment and applies, I'm going to show you how to turn it off and apply one of your own, like the one we offer over at Tropic. So for instance, right over into, let's see where we're at. Camera LUT. Cool. So right now I already went in and unchecked none. But like I said, when you drag footage in, it may go search for like one of the ones that already are preloaded into Final Cut. So I'm going to actually go to none because like I said, am not a big fan of the Canon C-Log LUT that kind of comes factory standard and also comes factory pre-installed into Final Cut. So I'm going to override and just turn this off. So that's just set to none. Perfect. Cool. So now that I am purely looking at, the C-Log 2 in its rawest, flattest form in my timeline. And that's totally fine because now we're going to add a custom conversion LUT. Cool. So to get started, we're going to navigate over in the lower right hand corner and open up our effects browser. And that's kind of illuminated by this like multiple icon right here. So with that selected in the lower right hand corner, I'm going to actually navigate over to color and I'm going to scroll down to where I see custom LUT. There you go. You can see that. I'm going to click it and drag it over onto my footage. Cool. So now if I navigate over to this little film strip icon, if you're not seeing this, that's where I'm at, the little purple blue film strip icon in the top right hand corner, you're going to see LUT and it's set to none. So what I'm going to do now is choose custom LUT. Mind you, I turned off the one that Final Cut auto applied, so I need to add a conversion look first. And over at Tropic, we have several conversion looks for some of today's biggest and most popular cameras that are being used today. So I'm going to choose custom LUT. So basically, it's going to try to navigate where you have your LUTs saved. And this is where you want to navigate to one of the conversion looks. So under the Canon C70 folder, because that's the conversion looks, that's the camera profile I shot in. There's several. We have a standard, some that already have an additional contrast, minus contrast. We have a few options, but I, for the most part, just use the standard conversion. So I'm going to select that and click open. So I've applied a conversion look. The footage looks great. I mean, this looks how I was seeing it on my monitor when I was shooting this scene. But that's not really where you want to end. We've just converted the color space to a more natural Rec 709 inspired look to our taste. So what I would recommend going further is essentially adding another custom LUT, which is going to be the creative LUT or creative look. So I'm going to, on that lower right hand corner, color, custom LUT, I'm going to drag another instance of this effect. And you're going to see apply beneath. Which is important. You want this to be beneath your conversion LUT. So same exact process where it says none. You're going to actually go choose custom LUT again and navigate to wherever you have maybe some of our creative looks saved. And here I'm going to be using in this demo one of our cinematic looks. But like I said, if you have movie looks, teal and orange looks, subtle mood looks, any of our creative looks or LUTs will work in this process. So one of my favorites right off the jump is artistry. And we've designed these LUTs to have a pretty heavy look initially so you can pull it back. And I'm going to walk you through how to do that because right when I hit open, you might be like, whoa, that's pretty strong. And we're kind of just setting the look to be strong because all different camera profiles may have more or less contrast than the other. So by starting very strong and have a pretty heavy look, it allows you to dial it back. So I'm going to hit open. And like I said, right off the jump, that's pretty heavy handed. Like that looks intense. You can see the white is kind of clipping, the blacks look a little crunchy. So what I like to do is where it says mix right here in that custom LUT, I'm gonna actually drag this down. And as I start to pull this all the way to 0, 0 means it's not being applied at all. 100 means, or 1 means it's being applied to the full effect, or 100%. So for instance, if I even just typed in 0.5, that would be 50%. One tip I like to do is I like to actually like kind of zero in on my footage or the, my preview window and not even look at the percentage and start at 0. And I just slowly click the mix and drag up, and don't even look where I'm dragging, just look at your footage. And once you sort of get kind of the right values that you're liking, that's where I usually stop. So I grab the mix, I'm looking at my footage, I'm bringing up the dial, and right around there looks pretty good, which yeah, is about 50%. So like I said, any sort of creative look you do, I highly recommend dialing in the mix, start from 0 and hike it up to where you feel like it looks really good on your footage. Because yeah, chances are that mix all the way to 100%, especially if you already have a conversion look applied, is gonna feel pretty heavy-handed. So from there, this is where I would recommend you guys taking a further, step and kind of dialing in the look, beyond this. If you wanted to add, maybe some tint, maybe you wanted to add some magenta, cool it off, crush the shadows, raise the highlights. I 100% recommend doing this. We're by no means telling you that applying our conversion and creative look is a one and done in your set. I think, all footage is different, right? So we've designed these looks to get you somewhere close, but for you may want to tweak the values a bit further, and we highly encourage that. So if you want to do that, I would go over to the color tab where we found the custom LUT effect, and I would just recommend grabbing the color wheels. Basically any of these, color curves, any of these things are great ways to kind of further dial in the look. So for instance, color wheels, maybe I just want to cool it off just a little bit beyond that this look is doing. So at the top, we have the custom LUT, just to recap, the conversion look. Below it, we have the creative look, which is our artistry from the cinematic looks pack we offer, mixed down to about 50%. And now I've just dragged the color wheels. So cool. Now that that's opened up, maybe I just want to lower the shadows a little bit, and maybe I just want to globally kind of warm this up ever so slightly. And what I like to do, once I've made any correction beyond sort of applying the conversion and creative look, is I like to check it off and on. So yeah, now this is what it was looking like before. I added these color wheels, and now I've warmed it up and kind of crushed the shadows a little bit. And you can keep going. You can have multiple instances of color wheels, levels, curves, anything to kind of get to the final image or where you feel like your footage is right where you want it. So yeah, that pretty much concludes how to import custom LUTs that we offer from Tropic Color. The step-by-step processes on how to essentially turn off the custom LUT that Final Cut tends to auto apply to your footage. If you like the custom LUT that Final Cut usually adds to your log or raw footage, you can bypass the conversion LUT process of this tutorial. And then yeah, we walked you through the process of navigating over to the kind of effects panel, color, finding that custom LUT, and applying a creative look and dialing in the mix. And yeah, it's a pretty simple process, though kind of long-winded. I feel like it's really not too complicated. I think the biggest issue, we have a lot of customers see these .cube files and just try to drag them right into the editing app of their choice. And yeah, most of these editing apps, you need to import those .cube files through some sort of effect. And in Final Cut, it's through an effect called Custom LUT. So yeah, that pretty much concludes this. If you have any additional questions that maybe were not covered in this, sort of Final Cut tutorial, or maybe one of these steps isn't quite lining up with what I demonstrated, feel free to contact our support team at tropicolor@gmail.com. Our team is there to help you. So yeah, hopefully that was helpful. Moving forward, if you wanted to stick around, I'm going to be diving into Davinci Resolve and showing you how to import and use our conversion and creative looks inside of Davinci Resolve. All right, to conclude, we are going to be diving into Davinci Resolve, and I'm going to walk you through the step-by-step processes on how to import .cube LUTs into Resolve, and the step processes on how to essentially color your footage. In this tutorial, I'm going to be using Canon C-Log 2 footage that I shot on my Canon C70. If you're using a different camera, Blackmagic, Red, Arri, the step-by-step processes on how to import these .cube looks, LUTs into the Resolve are identical. So don't let that trip you up if you have different camera profile, or heck, maybe if you're even using some different creative looks that I'm going to demonstrate, maybe one of our movie looks, teal and orange, subtle mood looks. Like I said, Same exact processes. Just for this demo, I'm going to be using these ones. So once I'm in Resolve, I am inside of the color tab. If you're not seeing this, just make sure to navigate over to the color tab at the very bottom of your screen. You can see the color icon is illuminated. And right now I'm looking at, like I said, my Canon C-Log footage, and it's looking like it's in its raw or log flat color space, which is what I want. If you are shooting on a camera like a Red or an Alexa, there is a chance that you actually might have a conversion look already being applied or sensed by Resolve. Resolve has kind of already pre-installed the way it sort of downloads right on your computer. It has actually some conversion looks already pre-built. So sometimes when you're editing in Resolve, right now it didn't do it for me, but sometimes it may actually auto trigger to apply a conversion look to, say, your ARRI footage. So if it already looks like you're looking at footage that's kind of graded or already has a LUT, you may need to navigate over to this camera raw section and turn that off. But for this instance, I'm using this Canon log or C-Log footage, and it still looks log. So the first process I like to recommend is adding a conversion look. Conversion look is going to get the footage looking very similar to how it was when you were on set. Chances are a lot of these cinema cameras, though they record in a raw or a log format, they're previewing as if they have a LUT or a look on the monitor, because it's really hard to like make exposure and color changes on set if you're looking at an image that looks like this. But before we can even dive into that, we need to import and install essentially these LUTs or looks, these .cube files into Resolve. So the first step you're going to do before doing anything is actually navigate over to File and scroll down to Project Settings. Once I'm in Project Settings, I'm going to navigate over to Color Management, which is kind of here in the middle of that left-hand section. And I'm going to go Open LUT Folder. And it's going to show me basically all the LUTs that are already pre-installed into Davinci Resolve. Like I said, in that kind of earlier explainer, ARRI's got some pre-ones, even Canon has some pre-ones. And like I said, I'm not the biggest fan of like the Canon sort of conversion look for C-Log. I just feel like it's kind of a little bit too desaturated, and I kind of like an image that has a little bit more robust color. So I'm actually going to create my own folder, or I think the easiest way is to actually copy and paste a folder into this. This is kind of like the directory. Anything you add to this folder is going to appear in Resolve. Right now, none of the, Tropic color, conversion, or creative looks are in this sort of directory, so we need to add that. So on a Mac, if I hit, Command N, it's going to open up a new sort of tab, and I'm going to navigate over to the C-Log, which has the looks, and the creative looks, which are the cinematic looks. And like I said, you might be using a different conversion look with a different camera, or a different creative look different than the cinematic looks that I'm using. So the step processes are the same. You don't have to be using these exact folders or looks or LUTs. So basically anything that you're working with, you're going to drag into that directory. So I have cinematic looks selected. I'm also going to hold Command just so I can select both. These are just on my desktop. If you're working off a hard drive, just navigate where you have these saved. And I'm going to right click and I'm going to hit copy. And now I'm going to move back over to that kind of Resolve directory, which has all the LUTs or looks that kind of pre-shipped with Resolve. And I'm just going to hit paste 2 items. And just to make it a little easier, I'm going to put a TC and perfect. So now you can see the 2 TC or Tropic color conversion and creative looks are at the bottom of this directory. Now I can exit out of this. And if you're on a PC computer, chances are the step processes are, like I said, very identical. If you're in Resolve on a PC and you hit that Open LUTs folder, it's just going to open that folder on a PC. So I'm on a Mac, but this step should be the same for you. So I'm going to exit out of that, exit out of this. So once you're back on the screen, you're going to want to hit Update Lists. Update List is going to basically refresh Davinci Resolve and basically tell the app to go look at that directory to see if anything new is added. So you're going to hit Update Lists and then make sure you hit Save. If you hit Cancel, it's going to disregard everything we just did. So you'd have to do those processes and steps again. So I'm going to hit Save. And the way to see if basically those LUTs or .cube files that we added to that directory did successfully install is navigate over to this node, which you'll see on the right-hand side, right click and hit LUT. And at the bottom, we can see we have our conversion looks and our creative looks. So the way Resolve works, and if you're in this app and use this app, you're probably very familiar with it, but it's basically node-based, where every node has basically kind of like layers. So in Photoshop, how you have layers that go down, nodes just go across. Cool. So this first node, I'm going to make this first node the conversion look. Like I said, the conversion look is going to conform that sort of raw C-Log footage to kind of how I was seeing it on the day in my monitor. So I'm going to hover over LUT after right clicking, going to go over to C-Log, and I'm going to hit standard conversion. Cool. So right off the jump, if I toggle this off and on, you can see this is looking very close to the way you probably remember your footage looking. This is just a standard conversion. And one thing I really like about Resolve is if you actually navigate over here to the bottom to this little kind of stack icon, you're going to see this thing called key output. Key output allows you to key the strength of this node. So if I'm at 0 right now on the gain, this conversion look is barely being applied. And if I undo, obviously, and go back to 1 is like 100%. So right off the jump, if any of our LUTs, the conversion looks or creative looks, if you don't like or feel like the strength is too high, I always encourage you to go over to this key output section and go to the gain and just lower it to taste. I do feel like 100% in this instance, given that it is a conversion look, works, but I will demonstrate when we add a creative look how dialing back that key output really works nicely. So moving on, the next step I'm going to do is add another node, basically another layer, so to speak, by hitting Option S on a Mac. And if you don't see that, or if you're on a PC, you can easily do the same thing by going over to Color, Nodes, and you can add a serial node. But I've Option S on a Mac basically did that for me. So with that selected, I'm going to right click and go over to LUT. And now I'm going to add a creative look. So a creative look is kind of expanding upon that converted image. So now that we've gone from raw or log to this sort of converted 709 inspired look, now it's time to give it an actual look, right? And in this tutorial, I'm going to be using the cinematic looks and I'm going to be using the artistry LUT. So right off the jump, I've applied the artistry LUT, and yes, right off the jump, you might be noticing, wow, that's pretty heavy-handed. And that's because we designed the creative looks to start off initially very strong to kind of compensate for the different camera profiles. Some cameras come in a bit more contrasty, or some cameras actually come in very flat. So these creative looks start off very strong, but if you remember, if I navigate over to this sort of key output section, I can gain this down or basically turn down its percentage or turn down the dial to taste. So I actually encourage you to go over to key output and just type in 0. And what I like to do is kind of zero in on my footage. Don't even basically have your mouse hovered over the gain, but really look at your footage and just begin to drag up. Don't even concern yourself with the numbers or percentages. Just go off your eye. So I'm looking at this right now. I'm starting to dial it up. And I think somewhere right around here feels really nice, which is 32%. So, your taste might want to take this look a bit further, maybe a bit less. So I always encourage you to use the key output gain and really dial in that creative look to taste. Because like I said, 100% probably very unusable. We just design them to be strong so you can scale them back. So 32%, maybe even just a little bit further. 37%, anywhere in that window is how I'm liking it. Like I said, your footage might be different. Maybe your footage is really bright, shot outside. So you might want to actually dial this up more or less. So the last step I like to do, because chances are, and I really do encourage you to kind of build upon these further, we don't sell these as set and forget. LUTs either transform or convert your footage or add a creative look to it. But it's really upon you to add an additional look or nuance to really dial it into your footage. And I really encourage you to build upon these by adding either another serial node or kind of tweak upon them further. So I'm going to do Option S after this node and basically just kind of navigating over to the color wheels. Maybe you want to crush the shadows a little bit. Maybe you want to just overall kind of cool off this image. And right off the jump, just those simple tweaks, I've kind of further upon built on the look that we've set. So that pretty much wraps up the Davinci Resolve, looks, LUTs, how to import them by sort of refreshing that directory folder in Resolve. And just walked you through the process of adding a conversion look to conform your footage to a 709 inspired image, and then basically adding a creative look of your choice and then dialing down the percentage to taste. That kind of concludes it. If you have any questions or bugs or anything that maybe didn't line up with the tutorial, I encourage you to reach out to our support team at tropicolor@gmail.com. Once again, thank you for checking this out. I hope it was helpful, and keep creating.